Hey guys, welcome back. We hope you all had a really good Christmas and Happy New Year to you guys. So obviously it's my first video of 2024. I do apologise on not posting anything last Friday. I wasn't feeling that well over the Christmas period. Seems to be a recurring theme at the moment in my life that always seem to fall ill on Christmas Day. Um, So by the end of last week, it just sort of caught up with me, and I just don't have the energy to film anything. However, I did research a couple of cases for you, so obviously I'm going to be posting this evening, and I'm also going to be posting at the end of the week. So today's story is one that I followed fairly recently, or come across very recently, sorry, because I was only a child when this happened. And it's just probably one of the most shocking cases I've come across whilst researching cases. I mean, obviously, every life matters, and every life is incalculable, but what I'm going to talk about tonight is extremely graphic, and I'm a person who I would consider myself quite long in the tooth. Sorry, stumbling across my words there. I consider myself quite long in the tooth, and some of the things I've seen, some of the things that I've read about, I thought things wouldn't really shock me that much anymore. This story that I'm going to tell you tonight, it blew all that belief system out of the water. I could have, hello Floyd. Do apologise, guys. Sorry, let me just move him out of the way. So, without further ado, we're going to get into the story of the murder of Kellyanne Bates against her supposed boyfriend, but we're going to call him a predator because that's what the man was. A man called James Patterson Smith. So, James Patterson Smith, he was born in. Sorry, guys, it's been a bit destructive tonight. So let me start that again. So, James Patterson Smith, he was born in 1948, and he lived and grew up in Gorton in Manchester. And he was initially described as a teetotaler, initially described as really house proud. He was a non-smoker and a really overall well-groomed man. In 1970s, aged only 22, he married his first wife, and this actually only lasted about 10 years, so they got divorced in 1980. And this was put down due to James's violence towards her. And just take note of that, because that's going to come up as a recurring thing with a couple of other relationships that he had and a couple of women that he dated after his marriage broke down. They also spoke out about his treatment towards them. And you notice as his relationships went on, the more violent and more just sadistic this man got. So from 1980 to 1982, he was in a relationship with a 20-year-old Tina Watson. And she said, sorry, that during the 2-year relationship, he basically used her as a punching bag, and he subjected her to severe beatings, and this even happened while she was pregnant with her child. She said that at first it was kind of like a little tap here, a little tap there, but in the end it was every day, and he would smack her in the face, he would hit her over the head with an ashtray, he would have kicked her in the legs, and he would kicked her in between the legs. So Tina eventually left him in 1982 after James had attempted to drown her in the bath. And again, keep note of that one as well, because again, that does crop up a couple more times throughout the story. So after this, after Tina had left him, James began a relationship with a 15-year-old Wendy Mottershead, and he was 34 around this time that he met Wendy. And this is another thing that does crop up. You notice as he goes through his relationships, his partners seem to get younger and younger, and he gets to the point that obviously he's grooming young girls as 14, 15-year-olds. And Wendy, she was also abused, and she described in one attack that he held her head underwater in the kitchen sink. So by 1993, James was now 45 years old, and he met 14-year-old Kellyanne Bates, and they began a 2-year secret relationship after he had basically started grooming her. So we're going to pause on James a little bit. Obviously, there's not really much history about this man other than what I was able to find and what I was able to talk about. She definitely is a paedophile on some sorts. There's no doubt about that. And obviously, a lot of these girls, they described how at first he would be charming. And to be honest, I'm going to sound obviously really judgmental here, but looking at the picture in the thumbnail of him, which by the way is the only photo of this man that exists, he would have to be very charming. I'm not gonna lie, because from what that photo shows, probably one of the most repulsive people that I've ever looked at inside, and hearing this story on the outside as well. Sorry, vice versa. Sorry, you get my drift. So we're just going to look at Kellyanne Bates here for a little bit, and then we're going to go into the story of what actually happened to Kelly. So Kellyanne, she was born on the 18th of May 1978 in Hattersley in Greater Manchester, and she was the middle child of 3 siblings, and she had 2 brothers, Paul and Andrew. Her parents were Margaret and Tommy Bates. Tommy was a HGV driver, and Margaret, she was a shop worker. And Kellyanne was described by everyone who knew her as a really bubbly girl, really loved life, but they also described the fact that she struggled with forming relationships with people her own age, and she had a really older sort of generation mindset. So she was into sports, and she was said to have been quite a tomboy by all accounts. And Kelly had aspirations to want to be a teacher when she grew up. So it was her affinity and caring nature that led her to be a trusted babysitter to the local children. And it was one babysitting job in early 1993 that leads her to cross paths with James. So as she was taking care of his friend's children. So that night, James, acting chivalrous and the refined gentleman that he professed and pretended to be on the outside, he offered to walk her home, and in his words, I wanted to walk her home to keep her safe. And so, like I said, James was initially really charming, and Kelly was said to have enjoyed the attention that he showed. So obviously, as I already stated, Kelly actually kept this relationship a secret from her parents for about around 2 years. So she eventually goes and tells them that she has got a boyfriend, but she refers to him as Dave Smith. So Tommy and Margaret assumed that this was just an older boy from college that Kelly had met through friends. But in truth, James was setting up a web to trap Kellyanne by getting her to lie to her parents. Concerns started to grow when her parents noticed that Kellyanne was sneaking out at night to be with James. They said that this was a behaviour that she just wouldn't normally have done prior to meeting James. So it gets to the point that Kellyanne isn't at home for days at a time, and when she is with James, when she isn't with James, sorry, he's constantly contacting her to see where she is. And then James actually speaks to Margaret on the phone and says that he has the same concerns regarding Kellyanne's behaviour and regarding her staying out all night. So this obviously conversation, this led to Margaret believing that she had an ally in James, and that he basically tell Kellyanne to go home and spend more time at home. And obviously predators, if they're grooming, they're really good at that. They're really good at getting people on their side initially, until obviously their true colours show. But they're obviously really good master manipulators. Like, we see it time and time again with every story that comes up about someone who's grooming or is a paedophile. So when Kellyanne turns 16, she moves into James's house in Galton. And one night, Kellyanne calls her parents and says that she's coming to visit and has a special surprise for them. So that surprise is that they are finally going to meet Dave for the very first time. So obviously, like I said, Margaret at this point and Tommy had only spoken to James, or Dave as he was calling himself, over the phone. They had never met this man in person. So Kellyanne eventually told them that Dave was 32, but when they finally met him, they could see that he was much, much older than what he was professing to be. So Margaret said upon meeting him, the hairs immediately just stood up on the back of her neck. As she said, in her own words, as soon as she looked at him, she could just see that he exuded evil. She said that on arrival, he was just really overconfident, and that he just sort of swaggered into her house. Margaret even recalled how she looked at a bread knife on the counter and she imagined herself just sort of sticking it into James's back. And she said that looking back, it was bizarre because she would never even think about or contemplate doing something so violent. So it's almost like a sixth sense sort of thing, or the mothering instinct in her to protect her daughter. She could see what kind of animal, maybe an animal wouldn't do what we're going to be describing. He was just, what kind of vile person this thing is or was. Margaret later stated that the biggest regret in her life was not killing him there and then. So Tommy had the same misgivings, and he said that in a conversation with Kellyanne, he asked her, is this what you really want? And Kellyanne, she just basically says to him, yeah, because I struggle to be with people my own age. I know obviously Dave's a little bit older, but this is what I want. I'm really happy. So after meeting Margaret, after this meeting, Margaret, she begins inquiring others if they do know a Dave Smith, who is 32, but no one in the area can confirm this. So by all accounts, I don't know, I've never been there. But by all accounts, Galton is a very small area in Manchester. And it's just one of those places where, everyone knows everyone. And, you only have to ask when your friends and be like, oh yeah, I know that person. So obviously, like I said, I'm only summarising from what I know of the area from doing my research. But obviously, it will ring alarm bells when you're asking around about a particular person and no one has any information on him in such a small area. So Margaret then contacts Dave and she quizzes him about his identity. And this is when she finally finds out that his real name is James, but he preferred to be called Jimmy. He then tells her that he wasn't 32. So obviously, as we know, at this particular point in his life, he was 48. 48-year-old man with a 16-year-old girl. So obviously, when they met, he was 46. He was in fact a year older than Tommy, like Kellyanne's own dad. And if you want to put it into another context, when James was getting his divorce from his first wife, Kellyanne would be 2 years old. He says that he didn't state his real age as he knew that they would object to his and Kellyanne's relationship. And it's kind of like thinking, well, no shit, Sherlock. What parent would want their 16-year-old daughter to be dating a man who's older than her own father? What parent? I mean, obviously, bear in mind, 32 isn't that really that good of an age either to be interested in 14-year-olds. But either way, the parents are going to object. Of course they are. They're protecting their child. It's just baffling to me that he would actually come out and say that bullshit. So they played with Kellyanne to come home, but she just basically flat out refuses. Margaret said that she wasn't sure on what to do as Kellyanne was at a legal age, and so this basically just meant that the police and the social services couldn't do anything in regards to Kellyanne leaving home. She also feared that if she kept pushing the subject, Kellyanne would just completely cut them out of their life. So I think Margaret, at the end, she just sort of started to relent on the relationship. So at one point, Kellyanne and James break up, but they make up and reunite by November 1995. And due to what we would now call stalking, basically, so he was just turning up at her home, he was constantly ringing her, wouldn't relent, and this ended up obviously with Kellyanne unfortunately making the decision to go back to James. So he just basically kept following her. He was wearing her down, telling her that everything was going to be all right. So we can only surmise that at this point he was already abusing Kelly. So by November 1995, Kelly ends up moving back in with James. And she tells her parents that she has a new job, and the overtime meant that she wouldn't be seeing them that much. The truth was, Kellyanne had actually quit her graphics job in December 1995, and there wasn't no new job. She just instead spent day in, day out, stuck in James's house. There are rare occasions that Tommy and Margaret were allowed to enter into the house, and this is when they noticed a huge change in their daughter's behaviour. So she would be sat in a chair constantly with her head down, barely speaking. She was described as being incredibly nervous as soon as they come in, and she, like I said, barely spoke or didn't even speak to him on some days. So, whilst in the house, James goes and shows them a hole in the floor that he claimed was made by repairs. And this repairs was searching for a gas leak. But Tommy and Margaret said they believed Kellyanne was being held down this hole as a prisoner. So one day, Kellyanne, she comes home to pick up her final belongings. And Margaret notices that one side of her face is black from one entire solid bruise on one side of her face. So Kellyanne, she tried to explain it away as that a bunch of girls had attacked her, and they also noticed further bruising and bite marks on Kellyanne. And Kelly said that they weren't bite marks; they just happened when she fell over a wire fence. One set of bruises she couldn't explain away was fingertip bruising that she had around her neck. Kellyanne at this point, she had even lost a lot of weight. She wasn't bathing and had neglected her appearance. She would walk around with her head down, her chin close to her chest, and just basically not giving anyone eye contact. So this was around the last time Kellyanne visited her parents, and after this, she only spoke to them on the phone. So Margaret is informed to make a doctor's appointment in Kellyanne's name by the police and social services. And she then was basically told to go to this doctor's appointment herself and explain the situation. So eventually, Kellyanne's phone call, they stop after Margaret said that she sounded really unnatural in them, most likely as Kellyanne knew that James was listening in on her phone calls. Oh, something that I neglected to mention as well, sorry guys. So throughout his life, James had gone flitting from one job to the other, but at a point in meeting Kellyanne, he was unemployed, which is why he was spending an enormous amount of time in the house with her, listening in on her phone calls. So it gets to the point that the only communication comes from birthday and anniversary cards that James had written. Kellyanne also missed important celebrations with her family. And her older brother Andrew, he goes to James's house and he gets told that Kellyanne has gone out at this point, so he went with the intention of seeing if his sister was okay. A concerned neighbour also calls, and James briefly presents Kellyanne at the window. And this was basically, in his words, to show that she was okay. On the 10th of March 1996, Kellyanne calls Margaret. She said that she missed a dental appointment. And this was the last time Margaret heard her daughter's voice. So Kellyanne promises she will visit on Mother's Day, which was due to be the next Sunday, so the 17th of March on that year. But she never actually turned up. And 2 weeks go by, and Tommy and Margaret are at the point that they want to go to James's house. So they want to knock on the door, basically barge away and save their daughter. They know what's going on at this point, but they just feel absolutely powerless to do anything because they're fearing the repercussions will be that Kellyanne is just going to cut them out of her life. However, Andrew tells them not to, and he says that one of his friends has seen Kellyanne and she was okay, but this was actually a miscommunication. So apparently one of his friends had indeed seen Kellyanne, but it wasn't at the time frame that we're talking about, so it wasn't in the March of 1996. The last time this person saw Kellyanne was in December 1995, and they said that obviously she looked absolutely fine. I do really apologise, guys. This is Ethel. So I do really apologise for the cat intrusion. So on the 16th of April 1996, James enters Galton Police Station He's claiming that he's accidentally killed Kellyanne. And he said that she had been in the bath and they had argued, and then she had somehow inhaled bathwater. He then tried to resuscitate her, but he was unsuccessful. And he amplifies this by telling the police that Kellyanne likes to pretend that she's unconscious. He then says, "I've killed her. I know I have." And then says to another officer, "I know I'm going away. There's no point. I'm going to get found out anyway." So police attend James's house and they quickly find Kellyanne's naked body in the bedroom. And it was evidently clear from this scene that her death was absolutely no accident. So police found traces of her blood in every single room of the house. And the coroner established her cause of death as drowning, but listed some of the worst injuries I've certainly read about in any of these cases. These injuries had been subjected to Kellyanne in the months and weeks, possibly days, leading up to her murder. So she, at some points, was being kept prisoner in the spare bedroom. And James would tie Kellyanne to radiators or chairs with her hair. Police knew this because they found remnants of her hair stuck on the radiator, On other occasions, he would just tie her up with a ligature around her neck. She had been deprived of food, causing her to lose almost 3 stone in weight. James had smashed her kneecaps in, scalded her buttocks and her left leg. He had burnt her thigh with a hot iron. He fractured her arm. She had multiple stab wounds caused by knives, forks, scissors, and this included stab wounds inside her mouth. Both her hands had been crushed. Her ears, nose, eyebrows, mouth, her lips, her genitals, all of these had been completely mutilated. She had wounds caused by a spade and pruning shears. He had gone so far as to partially scalp her. And then he strangled her with a ligature. The worst injuries, however, so these were calculated to be between 5 days and 3 weeks before her death. James had actually gouged out Kellyanne's eyeballs with his bare hands. And then he had even stabbed the empty sockets inside. The pathologist said, "In my career, I've examined 600 victims of homicide, but I've never come across injuries so extensive." He went on to add, "This is not from a single loss of control. This is from a sustained torture aimed at disfiguring and causing maximum pain." So after all this, James then placed Kellyanne in a scalding hot bath. He beat her around with the shower head and then held her head beneath the water. Despite everything that Kellyanne was going through, she pleads with her life. But in my head, I'm probably thinking, as bleak as it sounds, she was probably glad that it was finally going to be all over. That list of injuries, that would make anyone just want to die. I can't think of anything else worse than what I've already described. So police arrived at Kellyanne's parents and it was reported that they didn't have anything They didn't have to say anything. Margaret just basically opened the door and said to the police officer, he's killed her, hasn't he? So it was actually left to Tommy to identify Kellyanne's body. And during the interviews, James blames Kellyanne for his actions, saying that she inflicted the injuries on herself. And this was her way of trying to make him look bad. She emotionally abused him and she mocked the death of his mother and that she had driven him to kill her. He said that Kellyanne would enjoy winding him up and she would put him through hell. And he added that she would goad him and dare him to hurt her. And he only just obliged, apparently. You know, if you guys are not out there begging your boyfriend, girlfriend, whatever, husband, wife, if you're not begging them to gouge out your rivals, what are you guys doing in your relationship? How this guy had the audacity to sit there in an interview and come out with that absolute bollocks, pardon my French, it's beyond me. Like, how can anyone just sit there knowing what they've done and come out with that absolute bollocks? Like, it's fucking, I'm lost for words. So when the trial gets to Manchester Crown Court, he pleads not guilty to her murder. The prosecution said that Kellyanne's physical pain would have been too intense, caused anguish and torment to the point of a mental breakdown and collapse. It was as if James had deliberately disfigured her and caused her the utmost pain, distress, and degradation. Amen to that. So, a jury of 7 men and 5 women were not convinced with James's story. And after just 1 hour deliberation, bearing in mind that would also include, walking to the room and walking back, possibly stopping for a coffee at some point. But obviously they have to go through the motion, but they knew this guy was guilty, you know. They probably thought it was just too presumptuous of them to go back after 30 seconds. So James was found guilty on all of his charges. A consultant psychologist said that James had a severe paranoid disorder with morbid jealousy and lived in a distorted reality. And on the 19th of November 1997, he was sentenced to life imprisonment with a minimum term of 20 years. In his summing up, the judge stated, "This has been a terrible case, a catalogue of depravity by one human being upon another. You are a highly dangerous person. You are an abuser of women, and I intend, as far as it is within my power, that you will not abuse anymore." So due to the graphic evidence shown at the trial, this was reportedly so traumatizing that every juror was offered counselling, to which they all accepted. And after the trial, Tommy said that with each girl, he went further with the abuse. James was basically a time bomb waiting to explode. And with Kellyanne, that detonator basically just went off in his head. Absolutely agree. So obviously, like I said at the beginning of the video, you know, when you listen to the backstories of his victims, I mean, obviously I couldn't really find out a wonderful lot about them, just the brief things that they have spoken out about. You could definitely see that the cycle of abuse just escalated, as Tommy was saying, you know, like a bomb that just detonated. So Margaret, she actually sadly died shortly before Christmas 2020, aged just 65. And Tommy said that she was just basically always saying, I want to get back with Kellyanne. So she had twice battled breast cancer. And from what you can imagine, the stress of everything. I mean, it's reported, I think, that during the trial, I think she had her first diagnosis. So you can imagine the stress really didn't help with her health at that particular time. Thankfully, she survived that. She had to, unfortunately, go through it all again. Um, but she died of respiratory failure aggravated by asthma. So Margaret had stayed in her shop job, working in her local Tesco's, and the store was actually situated on the site where their family home had once stood. Margaret said that she always felt close to the checkout, close to Kellyanne when she was at that checkout. So following Kellyanne's death, she said people called him an animal. But animals don't do that to one another. He's just an evil man. When I think about the pain she was in and how she thought we didn't love her because we didn't save her, you know, not only has he completely ruined her family, he's ruined her, I want to say, mental state. To actually put someone through that and put them through the trial because you're not man enough to own up to what you've done. It's just disgusting. So James actually became eligible for parole in 2017, and this was actually thankfully denied. So they said that obviously he still posed a threat at this point in time. They didn't feel that he was ready, or the society wouldn't be ready for someone like James to be walking the streets again. And completely agree. Like, how can you change the mindset of someone who would do such an atrocious thing? And it was then reported in November 2022, so fairly recently. He had a second appeal rejected, thankfully. So James is currently 75 years old, and there's a strong possibility that he will die in prison. All I can say is amen to that. I really do hope that when he does finally meet his maker, it's a long, drawn out demise. Nothing more of what this man deserves, and then he'll probably know the feeling that Kellyanne had all the time that she was with this piece of shit. No other words to describe him. So that concludes today's story, guys. I do apologise, it's only a really short one. Despite how heinous this actually was, it's just one of those ones that unfortunately didn't really have a lot of information. You know, if you watch my videos, I like to go in on the backstory of these people, but as you can see, there wasn't really much on James's background. Because I would like to have known what formed in his head, what was he exposed to when he was younger, for him to think that this was an acceptable way to treat another human being. But I thank you guys for you following me throughout 2023. Here's to a really good 2024. So I will be having another video posted later on this week, so possibly Friday, and it's going to be quite an in-depth, quite a long video. By the looks of the research that I've done, this is probably going to be the one coming up is probably going to be one of my longest ones. So kind of looking forward to that. But anyway, thank you guys so much for tonight, and I will see you later in the week. Stay safe.